started with John Fink from the Community College Research Center at Columbia University. Just to give you kind of a quick overview for those who trickled in a little bit later. So John and the CCRC, I think it's been a couple of years, maybe a year or so ago, had done some research to try to identify what is it about schools out there who have actually successfully closed equity gaps in their partnerships between high school and higher ed. What is it about them that's led to them accomplishing that goal? And so they looked at several community colleges and their high school partners, and then broke down the work that they were doing into 5 principles and published the Dual Enrollment Playbook. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I would highly encourage you to read it. They also have an assessment, a self-assessment that can be done. We just completed that. At least I completed my part and then passed it on the executive cabinet. The assessment, that's something we'll be working on and looking at with our P20 group, I believe. So there's some excellent resources there. But enough of me talking. I'm going to turn the time over to John. He'll go for, I think it's about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. So we have a mic in the middle of the room. Once John's finished, for anyone that has questions, you can step up to the mic and ask those questions. So without further ado, we'll turn the time over to John Fink.
Thanks, Brandon. Hey, everyone. Good to be with you all. Hopefully you can hear me and see the slides I just put up on the screen. And it's great to be with you in this virtual format. You know, we're still kind of getting used to what this is like. And, you know, would have been nice to be out there, you know, but given everything, you know, I think this is a good option too. And hopefully I can sort of share some of the research that we've done at the Community College Research Center with our partners at the Aspen Institute, really looking on how colleges and their high school partners can strengthen and really better deliver on the potential of dual enrollment, dual credit, concurrent enrollment, particularly for expanding access to college and access to opportunity through college. So I'll be sort of presenting a couple things. First, I'm going to talk, you know, about our sort of research that really motivated the work leading up to the dual enrollment playbook, as well as our findings from field work to set pairings of high schools and colleges in 3 states, Washington, Ohio, and Florida, and sort of what we learned from that field work. But I've been working at the CCRC Community College Research Center since 2014. CCRC studies a range of topics related to community colleges, a lot on sort of developmental education and reforms to student success generally, on how to improve transfer student outcomes, alignment to the workforce, these guided pathways reforms, and really, you know, has been a part of the building evidence base around dual enrollment for the past 20 years. So just to sort of take a step back, thinking about the different opportunities that high school students have to sort of gain some acceleration and gain some early college experience. This is a graph that pulls from a few different sources, but is trying to take this broader view and situate dual enrollment, dual credit in this broader landscape. First, you know, the big takeaway here is that advanced placement is really sort of, you know, by numbers, the largest sort of opportunity across the country for students to gain college credit if they sort of pass or gain a qualifying score on the exam. But you can see dual enrollment in its many shapes and sizes and formats is really sort of also getting up there. And, you know, it's hard to get an official count nationally, given sort of how varied the models are, but we think it's sort of getting closer to 2 million high school students every year, especially when we think about like what's happened around the pandemic and, you know, that a lot of college enrollments have declined, but dual enrollment, at least nationally on average, has remained a little stable. So it's already a very widespread, large, you know, opportunity for high school students to gain college experience, and that's especially true in states like Utah and others that have had a lot of growth. The other thing, just as a caveat, you know, I'm sort of using the language of dual enrollment to sort of capture this idea in a very broadest sense. You know, there's a lot, part of the challenge of studying this, but also what's really interesting, it's just the many different formats in terminology here. So when I say dual enrollment, I'm really trying to speak very broadly to any sort of arrangement where a student is taking a course for college credit before they complete high school, with a post-secondary institutional partner, be that sort of located at the high school, taught by a high school instructor, or taught by a college instructor, at the college, online, everything in between. So thinking very broadly about that term. So part of the research that really led up to our dual enrollment playbook was just looking at where is dual enrollment happening across the country, and is it fair and equitable? Who's being able to be served by these programs? And so we used federal data from the Office for Civil Rights to look at by school district, just what are the participation rates, and in what sort of places or states is there more dual enrollment opportunity, sort of any type of dual enrollment. And as you can see in this map, these are school districts across the country. The darker blue areas have higher participation rates. So like 20% of high school students or more taking at least one dual enrollment course in the 2017 academic year. And just, you can unpack this a lot, but one big takeaway is that this is a very widespread opportunity across the country. And it's really widespread in most states. And we know that most of this is happening through partnerships with community colleges. Although I did note that is slightly different in the state of Utah, as I'm sure you all are aware. But it's geographically widespread, especially when you kind of look at the similar map for AP enrollment, just the percent of students who are taking an AP course. It's really sort of striking visually, just the different geographies that these programs are serving, with dual enrollment serving more geographically widespread, more rural areas, AP more concentrated in coastal or more urban areas. So dual enrollment is very widespread, and the expansion, if we look at just the growth, looking at college enrollments of students age 17 or younger. Again, we don't have very good national data on dual enrollment, so we have to do some guesswork. But I'm guessing there's not like 1 million Doogie Howsers enrolled at colleges in 2019. So we think that this is reflecting the growth of dual enrollment at colleges. And if you look across the country, like most of this growth is happening in the community college sector, which in the 2019 fall had over 1 million high school students enrolled. And again, if you layer on the pandemic enrollment effects, which we can't observe yet here, we know that there's been a big drop in adult enrollment with a stable enrollments of high schoolers. And so we see over time larger and larger shares of headcount coming from high school enrollment. So, we're the Community College Research Center. We study community colleges, and this is one of the big interests here, because we hear from community college leaders, high school dual enrollment students are making up larger and larger shares of our headcount. Like they're more and more who we're serving, because we've had really since 2011, the beginning of the recovery in the 2010s, really steep declines in older adult enrollment at community colleges. That was even before the pandemic. And then at the pandemic, older adult enrollment really fell off a cliff even more. And at the same time, we've had steady growth of high school dual enrollment. So what do you see as a result? You see that pretty large share of headcount, like who is a community college student, more and more is a high school dual enrollment student. Here are just some examples across the states. This is focused at community colleges, but about a quarter of Utah's community college enrollment, they're high school dual enrollment students from the fall of 2019. It's like a quarter of Texas. Just so many students. In some states like Idaho, Iowa, it's more than a third. So this is a really important, large and significant population for community colleges. And this change has sort of happened relatively quickly for higher education. So I think there's sometimes has been a disconnect as it relates to institutional strategy. And so what we're finding in the playbook is really sort of, bringing dual enrollment into the fold in terms of the broader institutional equity and student success strategy. So in general, the expansion of dual enrollment has been a really positive thing for students and communities. Because dual enrollment works. There's been a lot of evidence, really like rigorous evidence reviewed by the What Works Clearinghouse, through the Department of Education, just showing positive effects, positive impacts of participating in dual enrollment on high school outcomes like high school grades, high school on-time completion, college matriculation after high school, and college persistence and completion. So across its many different modalities, there's always questions about like what works better, in the high school, at the college. But really, there is sort of positive effects in many of these studies. And so, I think it really drives us more to the questions around not like which model works better, but how can we make them all improve and work better for the students they're serving. And we took a look at this in 2017 using National Student Clearinghouse data to just look at like where are students going to college after high school, and similarly like across all states, we saw really high college matriculation rates among former dual enrollment students and really high degree completion rates. And we'd sort of expect to see that. But in general, really strong effects. So the expansion has been good for students and communities. There's been more mixed and more questions around just like who's benefiting, and really is dual enrollment like living up to its potential to benefit students, to benefit really all students that could succeed in these courses. And really sort of, is there equity in terms of access and participation? Thinking about like, can this be a better college access strategy in addition to being a college acceleration strategy for students who are sort of on that track already? Can we better sort of lift up folks who might not otherwise be attending college? And the importance of this is, this time more than any others, I think is really critical to ask that question, given sort of the lagging and sort of declining rates of college attendance, declining rates of FAFSA filing. Really sort of thinking about the college access mission of dual enrollment is really key. So we looked at the same federal data to just see, like looking by race, for example, sort of what's the representation among these different groups of high schoolers, and compared to the high school student population overall in that first bar, both for dual enrollment and AP course taking, we found that Black and Native, Hispanic, Pacific Islander students are underrepresented in these advanced courses. And then in a follow-up analysis, we also showed that students with disabilities as well as English language learners are underrepresented as well. So I think this really just sort of points to what we know and what we see, that oftentimes these programs have earned the moniker of like programs of privilege. And so really raising the question of how do we better sort of expand the benefits for all students. I also want to just make folks aware that we've done this sort of reporting like by state and even by district. So I've included some links. We'll share the slides. So if you find this helpful to go and look, the federal data, it's helpful, but it's really high level and it's a little dated. So oftentimes like districts, colleges, even states have more accurate, more recent, more usable, closer to practice data to sort of look at some of these questions about access. But one of the, biggest motivations for our dual enrollment playbook study, was just that when we looked across districts nationally, this is data from the 2017 school year, and just looked at like the differences in participation rates between white and Black students or white and Hispanic students, we saw that so in many districts, these gaps in participation are pretty widespread. So that's all the purple districts you see up on the map. But in some districts we saw more green, which is sort of no gaps or sort of equalizing participation. And what we found, across all the districts is that 1 in 5 school districts had closed these equity gaps in access to dual enrollment. I think was just really asked this next question, what can we learn from school districts and colleges that have had, better outcomes, both in terms of expanding participation, increasing access among communities that have been underserved, as well as better outcomes in terms of going to college and succeeding in college after high school. So this is really what, in partnership with the Aspen Institute, we took on this question. We had to go a little bit more fine-grained from the federal data to get at this question. We had to partner with states where we could access the statewide data sets around, not just access to these courses, but our students then going to college after high school, and how are they doing in college? Are they, succeeding in their classes? Are they persisting to the next year? And so we partnered with Florida, Ohio, and Washington State to sort of do this analysis, where we selected pairs, individual high school and college pairs. So if you think about the typical community college offering dual enrollment, they might work with like more than a dozen different high schools. So we found community colleges with strong outcomes, and then their specific high school pairs. They're like shining star pairs that had a lot of success, broadening access to dual enrollment. And this had a specific focus on Black and Latinx and Native dual enrollment students. And so there was a strong results on access, but also in terms of success of those students. So they're really high course pass rates in dual enrollment. Students were accumulating, so at high rates of accumulating 9 or more college credits through dual enrollment, passing college level math and English through dual enrollment. These are some of the things we filtered for. And then again, like I said, really high rates of immediate college enrollment after high school, and then that persistence through that first year of college. So we looked both at measures of access and success and use that to sort of select the pairs. And then we visited 9 different sites, so 9 different pairings, which are listed here. At some places we visited multiple high schools because there were a few good examples from the numbers. But you can sort of see where these communities were in these 3 states. Sort of one takeaway here is just that, it wasn't all one type of dual enrollment. Like some of these had early college high schools and a really robust, just traditional dual enrollment program. Some of these were very strictly like at the high school, like concurrent enrollment model, like everything done at the high school. And some were very exclusively like at the college, like the Running Start in Washington model, where it's all just, intensive at the college, and then a mix of both. And again, I think, we get this question a lot of like, which types of modality works better? But what we saw here is that like each, the folks running these programs were playing to the strengths of their modality and sort of like figuring out what worked well for that type of setup. And there are different sort of opportunities and challenges for each of these. And I'm going to save some time for like questions, and I'd be happy to get more into that and talking about like, particularly for the concurrent model where most of the course taking is done at the high school, really what these places were doing to really create that college atmosphere. But again, they didn't have to worry about all the issues around transportation and those sort of things. But anyway, so from this research, we just went in essentially wanting to see like, the big question was just, you were selected because you had really strong results. Like, what do you attribute that to? We spoke with students, faculty that were teaching the courses, dual enrollment program directors, superintendents, college presidents. We really tried to cover a wide array of folks at each of these institutions. Spent time at the district office, time in the buildings of the high schools, time at the colleges. And we sort of organize across all of this, our findings into 5 broad principles. And then we have like a set of practices within each that we detail in the playbook. So just as a brief overview, the first thing was just prioritizing equity and really sort of broadening college access as a key purpose of dual enrollment. In addition to sort of accelerating and giving students who are already on path for college a jump start on that education. Really a both and a prioritization there around broadening access to college. So with that in mind, that led to a variety of tactics just about how do you expand access? Like, what does that look like? So I want to talk through some of those. But number 3 was really, you can't just open up access, you have to then provide additional supports to make sure that students are going to be successful, in that, with that additional challenge requires additional supports to be successful. Which includes, support to high quality instruction, support to faculty and instructors that are teaching the courses, both to maintain quality and rigor, but really also to ensure that students are well supported and well prepared for college after they complete high school. We also just documented, a number of things that the institutions, the pairings were doing to sort of maximize their teams and really sort of better partner around data, sort of meeting structures, this sort of thing that you're doing here today, getting together to talk across, K-12 and post-secondary. Let me sort of illustrate a few of these takeaways, and then I'll sort of open it up for more discussions, and we can sort of take this, in the directions that you all would find it most useful. The first thing I'll say about the first principle is really, it's about vision. It's really about like how folks are thinking of the purpose of these programs. And something we saw across all of these visits was really a thinking about fairness. And, from the dual enrollment program director, we always heard this, like, dissonance around like, well, I know a lot of these high school students could benefit from these courses, but they're just not in them for one reason or another. Like they didn't sign up for the placement test, or they didn't know about them, or they couldn't afford to go to campus or whatever. There was like sort of little barriers, but the school counselors or the assistant principals, like something didn't seem right about that. It was sort of unsettling. Like, wow, the students could really benefit, but they're not getting that opportunity. And so that that's sort of a vision thing around who can benefit, and then what do you do about that? Like, how do you start the tactical work of really working to broaden access, which we documented in the second principle. Really a lot of different stuff going on here. First, about just early awareness and building not just students but communities understanding of these opportunities. So going out to sort of communities and communities of color here, partnering with civic organizations like churches, sort of other boys and girls clubs, really just getting the word out about this, dual enrollment opportunity and these pathways into college, even, partnering with middle schools, thinking about folks that are coming up to create that early exposure to the opportunity. What is the opportunity? Lots of really sort of active recruitment, not just like passive, I'm going to sit back and just whoever qualifies, fill out the application. If you can figure this out, you can participate in the courses. Less of a passive, like we're waiting for you approach, and much more of a proactive, like going out and recruiting and, putting the information into people's hands, making it easy to sort of learn about and then pursue and follow through to enroll. The placement testing was really interesting, especially thinking about how this has changed since the pandemic. We visited places where there was a very strict like placement testing eligibility requirement. And then the partners were working together to like limit the impact of placement testing in terms of like excluding groups of students. So there were things like, bans around cut scores. There was one approach that was just, we're going to test all incoming ninth graders, like everybody's going to take the AccuPlacer. And there was some like, initially it was a local foundation that paid for that, but then the college started absorbing the cost. And so part of this is about like sort of cost and incentives, and I want to make sure we can get to that. But that was just one way that the pairing in Southeast Ohio just decided that we're not going to make taking the test a barrier. We're going to just have everybody take it, and then if you didn't pass, you're going to take it again the next year. We saw boot camps, a lot of like prep to just like, let's get past this placement test, and then you can be eligible and you'll be on your way. We also saw just alternatives to placement tests. So high school grades, that was the biggest example. And, whether the cutoff was 2.75 or a 3.0, we heard from assistant principals that would like pull groups of students right below that cutoff. So students that maybe had like a 2.55, 2.6, 2.65, pull them in and say, look, like if you can get your grades up this term and, get an A, raise that a little bit, next term you could be taking these college courses. So with the GPA, they're really using that as like a motivator, that you're so close, like look what you could be taking, and be so exciting, these college pathways that you could start on. Now with the pandemic, a lot of some states just did away with the placement testing and now are sort of considering going back or not. But I think irrespective of the sort of policy regime, there definitely were ways to expand access if that was the intention, if that was the mindset. But again, we can't just expand access. We also saw a rich set of things to provide additional supports to students to ensure that we're not just sort of going to push you in to these courses, we're going to make sure that you're going to succeed. And this looked like sort of advising, like between the school counselor and the college advising, like sharing notes and some like figuring out a way to have a joint system to share notes to sort of make sure students weren't being lost in the cracks in between the two sites. We saw some of that. Like when it was all at the high school, it was a little bit easier, like because the school counselor just sort of like, and the assistant principal could sort of track all the students down in the hallway, and they could really be on top of everything, and they could go in to talk to the instructor. It could all be done like in-house right there. So that was some of the benefits of that model. But again, to really, on the fourth one, to create that sort of rigorous college atmosphere, they were also doing things to really ensure that students were getting that sort of college experience by, really thinking about the instructor, by creating sort of spaces, schools within the school, and other ways to really deliver on that college teaching. The other thing around advising that we saw, especially when you're coming with this mindset of not just expanding access to dual enrollment, but expanding access to college through dual enrollment, then we heard a lot of focus on like, how do we reduce random acts of dual enrollment or dual credit, where students are just sort of like loading up on any courses that they can take because why not? But really the college thinking about how do we better align the course offerings to our programs that we offer or to the transfer pathways in the area, so that students can, get these college courses, but also start gaining exposure to how those courses start them on a trajectory to a bachelor's in biology or an AAS or whatever it is. So really thinking about that, not just taking college courses to take college courses, but sort of this college course taking as a way to explore and think about college programs as a really key piece of then attracting students back to college after high school. Let me show you kind of a couple examples of that from Lorain County Community College. So a lot of community colleges are doing this work around transfer to map their transfer associate degrees to bachelor's degrees. What Lorain County Community College was doing was taking those transfer pathways and then aligning them also to their high school requirements. So students could see, and they could use these as advising tools, how can I start on my bachelor's in business at this local university through dual enrollment, and then continue on, to get my associates after graduation, and then, upwards to the bachelor's. Not only were they sort of doing that backwards mapping, but they were using that as a recruitment tool to students and families, saying, look, you can go to Cleveland State and get a bachelor's in psychology. If you just did that, after high school, straight to the 4-year, that would cost $95,000. But if you did it, through this pathway, through dual enrollment, it costs $12,000. So, I mean, this was a little bit of like back of the envelope math here, but I think it really resonated and it connected with students and families that were really cost conscious, and made this a big recruiting tactic for their dual enrollment programs. So sort of backwards mapping the programs. And we know, students are going to change their mind. They might, this is an exploration process, it's a developmental process. They don't have to set their whole life in high school, but at least, they should be aware of what these different options are, and, how their course taking can sort of later apply to these pathways, and get connected to faculty that are teaching these courses, and better learn about, why they're interested and what it leads to, what their careers would look like. Just a couple of other examples of this. Here's another one that I thought was great. I wanted to include the link from Northeast Iowa, really focusing on this as like a developmental process for students. And what I wanted to highlight here is just like how for their different dual enrollment courses, they sort of indicated like in an area like business and marketing, just which courses are more like introductory, gaining awareness, and which ones are more like applying to the program to help give that guidance to students of like, well, if you want to explore this area, here are some of the sort of courses to test out. And like many community colleges, they're sort of restructuring like their 100+ programs into like 7 or 8 broad areas like business, marketing, hospitality, to create more like communities, like academic communities within the college, which helps with the sort of like choice architecture and students' exploration of programs. A couple other examples in here. So I want to make sure we have time for questions, but I do want to sort of end by really framing all of this sort of findings around 2 questions that we're just hearing loud and clear from community colleges that are in a really tough place enrollment-wise, but also their communities really need them to expand and uplift economic opportunity. And there's a lot of this work sort of comes down to these 2 ideas, programs of privilege and random acts. And sort of what's the opposite of this? Well, it's expanding access to dual enrollment, but making sure that's connected to a high opportunity college pathway. And so sort of with that framing, what we are calling dual enrollment equity pathways, there's sort of two guiding questions for colleges that they need the support and partnership of their high schools in K-12. First, how do we broaden access to dual enrollment? Sort of what can we do to expand access? And second, what's the potential for recruiting more dual enrollment students into our programs after high school? So we want students to go to college everywhere, but are we making it clear to students what our college offers and how much they could save on their path to a bachelor's through our transfer pathways? And are those pathways really strong, and are they actually delivering on that promise? So this is what we're hearing more and more from colleges, really. And to connect this back to incentives, there's a clear sort of equity imperative, and there's a real clear business case for community colleges to make more investments in this sort of more strategically aligned dual enrollment to their college programs, just for the sake of attracting more students back after high school, but not just any students that are already on their way, that have already demonstrated success and are really strong. So we're seeing just more focus between the high schools and community colleges around how do we expand this type of model? How do we make additional investments to create a sort of win-win between the K-12 and community college partner? So I know that's sort of a lot of information. I did just include a lot of resources related to these two areas in the slides, which you can download if you sort of scan the QR code. And I think we have maybe 10 minutes. I want to sort of get a sense of what the questions are, what the challenges are, what, from our field work, are there any ways I can lend an insight to help advance your work?
So welcome to Utah, first of all. One thing that we're seeing here, I'd be interested in other states and their funding sources. In Utah, we've always had a robust concurrent enrollment program, but funding hasn't increased in years and years, which hurts the college program and the high school program. So I don't think that anybody in this room has the answers to that about funding sources, but it'd be interesting to see how other states are dealing with lack of funding. I think in Utah, we're also dealing with language skills. We talk about minority populations and getting them into our dual enrollment or concurrent enrollment programs. But in high schools, I hate the word force, but we welcome students who don't know language, and our responsibility is to teach them language, but also get them credit. And then to add, but there's a possibility of dual enrollment, and we're trying to push more minorities or underrepresented populations into concurrent enrollment, but they don't have the language skills and the class sizes that we have, again, which goes back to funding, smaller class size so we can deal with those. High schools have to provide some accommodations, and I don't think college and universities are in that same modality necessarily. So it's causing a lot of issues. We also have a lot of undocumented students here, and getting a large, robust population. I know at my school alone, we've picked up 60 students, immigrant students from Venezuela, who are very upwardly mobile, but don't have the skills, and they're undocumented because they're political refugees. So I'd be interested how other states are doing with dual enrollment with undocumented. We want them to have the same opportunities, but undocumented, we're almost shutting the doors here, where high schools help. College and universities have very tight limitations there. You talked about additional supports to help ensure success. I'd like to know what those additional supports would be in the way that you define those. And then I think one of our weaknesses here is we kind of work in silos as high schools and colleges. If it would be interesting to know what states or what school programs where this is really working well, so that we could share or still or whatever it is and stop working in silos. And with that, I'll sit down.
Thank you. Thank you. And those are, I mean, those are all such good questions, important topics. Let me try to sort of hit and respond to a few of those. You know, just on the funding, this varies so much by state, even by localities within states. The joke from Ohio is, oh, well, it's the college credit plus program. It's a fair program because it equally doesn't fund very well the K-12 and colleges. So that's the sort of joke. Like no one's really, there's always sort of pain points here. I think what we saw though is just, you know, basically trying to find like where's the win-win for colleges and high schools if you get people together like you're doing now, and just saying like, are we on the same page around the vision here around, you know, improving our dual enrollment programs? How are we both going to have a win-win here? Like, what's the incentives? And just to sort of illustrate what that looked like, you know, I talked about for colleges, you know, enrollment is a big motivator right now, thinking about sort of expanding the pool of talented students that are going to come back to the college after high school. That's pretty clear. For the school districts, we heard that, you know, a few different things. First, there's sort of the equity and social justice component, like better serving the community. There's also, you know, and we visited Ohio where there's open choice districts. The two districts we visited, you know, we heard that, you know, our school is known for three things: our basketball team, our culinary program, and our dual enrollment program. Like, it's very much a feather in the cap. I don't know how well that translates to your context, but it was a big, you know, way to attract parents and families to the districts. To be able to offer these really robust programs. But there's others, you know, but I think it's key that there, you know, if there are going to be additional investments in terms of staff time, actual resources, you know, shared costs, that sort of thing, there need to be sort of common incentives and that sort of win-win. So I think the key takeaway is just, you know, do like you're doing, meet with your partners and sort of explicitly talk about like, how can you create those incentives from both sides, you know, given your unique funding context. Funding is just one piece of the incentives, but look for other ways to create wins. You know, just thinking about like, so on the enrollment motivation, this is connecting to expanding access because, you know, where is the opportunity to gain more students going to college and more enrollments and more retention and more revenues for colleges? It's among students who have been sort of excluded or shut out in one shape or form from these opportunities. So I think those go really well together. You know, we're doing this because it's the right reasons, but it's also good for business and from the college perspective. So I think we heard a lot of that from our field work. You know, as to what does the additional supports look like, that I think depends a lot on the modality, but, you know, what comes to mind initially is that like the school counselor, so in the high school model, concurrent model, like the school counselor having the support and capacity to like track down every student that might be struggling and get that information from the instructors, and being able to follow up and catch them in the halls, and knowing to focus, okay, this first 2 or 3 weeks of the term, this is really where the rubber's hitting the road. So how are we wrapping those supports around to make sure we're not losing any students? So, I mean, that's what we heard from these places. It was really the people, and they had the capacity to do that. Like they had a list and they'd go down the list. It was really sort of, you know, just really student by student. We asked them like, what sort of data and metrics are you looking at? They're like, we just like have lists and connect with everybody. So, but I think the investment there is like having the capacity and to do that. We also saw like sequencing of courses and folks thinking about like, okay, if we're going to broaden access and get a wide range of 10th graders starting to take college courses, let's start them with like world geography or something that is like a little bit of more of an ease into the college. So thinking about, and the instructors also having that in mind, like how are you meeting students where they're at, but by the end of the term, you know, bringing them up to that level of college course taking, or easing them in through that first course, or not, you know, having students just take one course first and then like kind of layering in. So thinking about that from a programmatic perspective, while also making sure that like the quality and rigor is still there. We're using the same textbooks, we're using the same syllabi, the same course information, that sort of thing. One other reaction on just the undocumented students. This was a big issue in Florida where we visited. And just what we heard loud and clear from the students and the staff was just like, because dual enrollment is free for high schoolers there, I mean, for undocumented students, this was like the more dual enrollment they could take and load up on, like the better, because it was free college. You know, there weren't, you know, they could participate in these courses, and they were doing well in a way that, you know, just by you know, graduating high school and going, there were just a lot of limitations as to sort of their aid and, you know, being treated as out of state students. So I think folks were really seeing this as a big opportunity, a lot of like word of mouth, and trying to capitalize on that. But I'm not sure how, you know, what the translation is there for your context.
Hello, John. I'm Teresa Mbaku, CTE Director, Salt Lake City School District. And I'm here with Mr. James Yappius, who is our Salt Lake Education Foundation Director. We have 3 questions. First of all, would you talk more about the passive and proactive approaches that you found in your research? Second, random access versus better alignment of college courses. I think a lot of us deal with that, students just taking random courses. But the third one, James and I are working on a concurrent enrollment advisory board. Have you had any experience or research information on how advisory boards in the school district can help the concurrent enrollment program?
Thank you for those questions. Just to respond to that, we did see a couple examples of like kind of like parent, you know, having this be a part of like parent or family sort of engagement boards, or ways to sort of create that feedback loop from the folks that are that are served by these programs to sort of, you know, students, parents, families, et cetera, providing that feedback. So I could, you know, imagine something. We also heard that like having regular and sort of, whether they're quarterly or twice a year meetings between, you know, the school district and high school partners and the college partners, not just the program directors, but really some more leadership level, was really key on just like, and having regular standing agenda items there around the priorities and vision or strategy. We have some in our associated resources. We actually have like discussion questions for meetings like that, who you might want to invite in the sample agendas. So I'd encourage you to check those out. But it all kind of gets at this same idea like about a board of just that continuous improvement, making sure you have the right stakeholders, like right people at that, and, you know, to definitely make sure that includes students, parents, families. You know, the random acts and passive versus active that you're sort of bringing up, I think just are some real key concepts that we were, you know, learning about in this field work. You know, the random acts terminology, I think is some of that is controllable and some isn't. It's like easier said than done to reduce random acts. You know, we hear that obviously the availability of instructors is determining the availability of course offerings. Like which courses can be taught is depending on who can teach them and where. So, and then all of the stuff around like that, who can teach them, like, and the guidelines around eligibility there. So, you know, it does start to be really complicated in terms of like this change that needs to happen. You know, I don't think there's definitely not a silver bullet here. But aside from the fact of just bringing that sort of that perspective or that principle of, you know, how can we better align the courses that we're offering to like what comes next after high school? And sometimes, you know, that can be done within like the courses that are being offered by having these pathways mapped, by, you know, doing that sort of recruitment, you know, into, you know, okay, you're in this like shop class. Did you know about these like degrees that you can get, like the AAS or the long-term certificate from our college? Just like using those courses that are offered as recruiting grounds for, you know, students to get those longer term credentials. Because you mentioned you're in the CTE area. I mean, this is just so crucial to really think about the connection to longer term certificates and degrees, and how can we actually get that alignment through the high school CTE courses, you know, thinking about it, applied associate degrees, especially in terms of just what's going to set students up for, you know, that sort of career job outside of high school. And I know that, again, is easier said than done. I mean, the passive versus active thing is just about I think it comes down to the philosophy of these programs. You know, are these programs for like solely for students that are going to college, and this just helps accelerate them? And so, they'll figure it out. They have the resources. They'll sort of find it. They'll apply. It's sort of the burden is on them to do all of this. Versus this is a shared burden. And as you know, if we want to create a fair system, we need to make sure that there's fair access to information and fair opportunity to participate in this. And that's where more of that proactive outreach, I mean, we visit places where it's like, well, my son, we're talking to the dual enrollment like faculty member, program director, and like, oh, my son knew to do X, Y, and Z to fill out this form to connect to this person, because I had to tell him. But it shouldn't be because they're the son or daughter of one of us that they're, that's a little bit of an extreme example, but I think you get what I'm saying, that there is this sort of hidden knowledge too often about navigating these complicated systems. So we need to be more proactive.
All right, well, I think we've run out of time, but I just want to give a big shout out and thanks to John for being willing to share this information. Hopefully this has been very mouth wetting. I don't know what the term is, but it's gotten me kind of excited about some things we can do. So thanks again, John, for the time you've taken to share this information with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.